Good morning to those who are with us in the hearing room in Edinburgh and those who are following online. I think we're able to resume, Mr. Connell, with Mr. Pardy. Is that correct?
That's correct, provided my screen lights up at some point, which would be handy. Because at the moment I'm not seeing anything other than a white screen with some headings on it. I don't need it for the next few minutes, but be handy in due course to be able to see some things.
Right. Can we begin? Yeah. Right. Good morning, Mr. Pardy. Now, as you understand, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. Connell, who's sitting opposite you. But first, I understand you're prepared to affirm.
Yes.
Sitting where you are, can I ask you to repeat these words after me? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly.
I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm.
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth.
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth.
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Now, Mr. Pardy, your voice is, to my no doubt inadequate hearing, is a little light. We've got quite a large room and people need to hear you. I certainly need to hear you. The microphones are there to assist, but could I ask you to speak perhaps a little louder and maybe a little slower than you would in normal conversation? I and others will be taking notes. So if I could ask you to do that, I'd be very grateful. Now, Mr. Connell.
Well, good morning, Mr. Pardy. Can I start by asking you a formal question, which is asked of all the witnesses, which is that you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry. Are you content that you adopt that as part of your evidence to the inquiry?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you, obviously, some questions about the ventilation system, in particular at the, I'll just call it the new hospital, to avoid getting into a debate about which bit, unless the context requires otherwise. At times, I may use the word you. That may mean you individually or you as representing ZVP. So it's no more an issue than that. We're just checking some. The technology is being fixed for me, I hope.
Thank you.
Now, I'm not going to go through your CV, but you've obviously spent a lifetime working in the field that you ultimately came to specialize in, which appears to be to do with ventilation and often to do with ventilation in healthcare projects. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you indicate in your witness statement at page 5, and I'm using page numbers which will appear at the top of the page to accord with the electronic bundles that we have. You indicate a number of projects, including leading roles in the building services design. I'm going to ask you about this concept of ventilation design a little later. In a number of hospitals, including Great Ormond Street. Do you remember what kind of protective environment for immunocompromised children you designed at Great Ormond Street? Just in general terms.
Yes, in general terms, I was involved in the early days of the project and then handed over to a colleague because there was a pause in that process. So we didn't get into the detail of the really nitty-gritty detail of that systems. But we were made fairly aware at the beginning by the estates team, who obviously knew their facility. They already had an existing facility on that site. About the bone marrow treatment rooms in particular, there were various departments within that building, and they had a series of isolation rooms, which had a pressure cascade from the room out the corridor and then to the rest of the hospital. And we did a diagram at the time just to feed back to them what they meant. And that's what we did. And that's as far as I got with the project. I didn't go into the actual detail of that time. That was handed up to another colleague.
I see.
Could I just check that detail with you? I understand that you perhaps didn't spend a lot of time on the project, but my understanding is that the Great Ormond Street Hospital complies with the English Health Technical Memorandum. And when you're talking about the pressure cascade from, if I noted you correctly, isolation rooms, is that what you said?
That's right, yes.
Was there also a pressure cascade from the ward within which these isolation rooms were situated and the rest of the hospital, the corridor outside?
I believe there was, yes.
Thank you.
A very low pressure at that point.
Right, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Cullen.
You go on to make a point, both specific to Great Ormond Street and elsewhere, about the role that, in your experience, the estates team played. And you make the point in paragraph 8 that you were accustomed, at least, to getting quite a lot of input, whether the word pressure is the right word or not, but certainly input from the estates team as to what they wanted.
That's right. They know their facilities best, and therefore that was the first point of call. Certainly in latter years, we've had that experience, and they often, particularly at Great Ormond Street, they're very obviously leading in this field.
Just if I can just ask you, just nothing to do with the content of your answer, but if you could just speak up.
Okay, sorry.
Again, if you don't mind, because if your voice drops away, His Lordship may not be able to pick it up.
His Lordship will not hear you, I'm afraid.
Yeah, because you were asked a question from the chair a moment or two ago about following the English guidance, with which I assume you're very familiar. Is that right?
Yes.
And in fact, what you say at the top of page 6 of your witness statement is that Great Ormond Street didn't always follow the guidance, but they always got NHS England clearance before they changed anything.
That's correct, and they pointed that out to us that that particular system doesn't necessarily follow the HTM, the English HTM, but they'd always consulted with NHS England to get agreement, and they'd had, I understand, on certain things they'd had various conversations with them, and then finally got agreement.
You then give an example in the next paragraph of another hospital where it was done slightly differently, but again, pressed by the estates team. You're obviously making a point here, and you appear to be making the point that in this project that we're talking about, in this inquiry, that there was very little discussion with the estates team during the design process.
Yes, as I recall, we didn't have any conversations, significant conversations with the estates team on any part of this project.
I'm going to come back in due course to ask you about how you did do what you did in this project. So we'll bear that point in mind. One of the quirks that the inquiry has been coming across is that at various points, participants in the process talk about the technical team or the tech guys or the like. Can you remember ZBP ever being described by GGC participants in those terms?
No, I think we were always considered as the part of the contracting team and the M&E designers for the project.
Can I, in your statement at page 7, you explained that you were involved during the bid stage, but not formally appointed until Multiplex got the contract in late 29, early 2010. The date doesn't matter. Were you advised of any of the responses from the other unsuccessful bidders?
No, no. In fact, I think there was some information sent out last week, late last week, when it's the first time I'd seen that.
Yeah, well, you've obviously been following along then. You're aware that one of the other bidders, in the course of a number of complaints about how the process had been scored, indicated that you weren't going to get your air change rates if you used chilled beams, but you hadn't been made aware of that.
No, we hadn't been made aware of that.
Now, the next topic that you touch on, and we'll probably get through this reasonably quickly, is the employer's requirements. And obviously you were not involved in the preparation of the employer's requirements because that was done by GGC with their own team, is that right?
That's correct.
Were you aware that the employer's requirements had a provision to take into account infection prevention and control when designing the hospital?
Having looked back, yes, I saw that was in there.
Were you aware of it at the time?
I would have thought we would have read the employer's requirements through and been aware of that.
Sorry, I didn't catch that answer.
Yeah, we would have been aware of that requirement, having read the employer's requirements through.
Well, I needn't bother digging out the document, putting it up on screen, since you're obviously familiar with it, but it says that prevention and control of infection shall remain a primary consideration of the contractor in the design and construction of the works. Just taking that as a generality for the moment, how would you, as a ventilation designer, take account of that in the work that you then did?
I think that from our point of view, that would mean we were designing sufficient facilities to allow infection control to be maintained. That would mean access to cleaning, ductwork systems, access to terminal units for cleaning on a routine basis, and all the requirements of the SHTM associated with the plant, so there was no, for instance, Legionella would be things. So it would mean, from our point of view, that it would mean that the systems were designed so that it could be fully maintained to prevent future microbiological contamination.
You go on to touch on a number of issues, including in the foot of page 7, paragraph 17, what you say, the carbon target. Now, you say this was heavily emphasized. Who by? Do you remember?
I suspect it was by the board. This was initially picked up during the competitive dialogue sessions that we had. I think we had 3 or 4 of those over that period leading up to the bid being submitted. And it was definitely emphasised. We even had a separate workshop for the breakout, so that I recall that we went along to these 3 or 4 dialogue sessions, and then there was a number of topics to be discussed, and one of them I remember was the how we would actually achieve the carbon target. We broke off in that would have been ZBP, probably myself, the representative from Multiplex, and then it would have been the lead on the carbon target, which was Susan Logan. And we went through that process. We presented how we were going to show that we would achieve that, and that was in a spreadsheet report form, and where we could identify various systems.
I'm sure it's partly me, Mr. Pardy. I am finding it difficult just to get the detail of what you're saying. I don't know if the positioning of the microphones might help. Or maybe not.
I can repeat it if you
Yeah.
want.
As I say, please feel free to speak more loudly than you would in conversation.
Now, is the amount of carbon emitted by a building solely the product of the ventilation system, or is it influenced by a lot of other issues?
Oh, it's definitely influenced by a lot of other, all the systems, all the active systems in the hospital or any other building would be influenced. Lighting, the amount of power that's consumed by the equipment in the building, the actual heating and cooling of that air or that building. Would all influence, and the fans are another big energy user in a building, particularly a hospital.
Now, if we go on to the next page of your statement, we've had a discussion with various witnesses about this thing called BREEAM, and whether BREEAM was a driver for what was ultimately produced as a solution here. I'll take that word solution out, but an agreed arrangement for air change rates. Your position, as I understand it, is that while BREEAM was something you had to look at, it didn't have a significant influence on anything you were doing.
No, BREEAM, is only one relatively small part of the overall analysis process or validation process of how you achieve the excellent rating. There's one element that actually is related to energy. I can't remember which one it is now, but used to be.
But in terms of driving what we're about to discuss, which is the air change rate issue, you don't think BREEAM was the driver for that?
No, we would have had to achieve a certain number of credits under the BREEAM system to achieve excellent, and that would have then driven the energy.
Now, the other issue that's cropped up as possibly being a key element or driver of the discussions about air change rates is what's been called the maximum temperature variant. Now, the label may or may not be an accurate one, but I take it you're familiar with the fact that a decision had been made to try to achieve 26 degrees as a maximum rather than 28 in the guidance.
That's right. As I haven't looked at the documents, I couldn't remember it from my own memory, but having seen the documents, yes, clearly was a requirement to achieve that.
And was that a significant driver for what we are coming on to discuss?
It would have been, yes, because the typical design summer temperature for Glasgow was around about 26 degrees. So to achieve 26 inside with solar gains and just air coming into the building would have actually influenced the way we designed the systems.
And again, in terms of achieving an internal maximum temperature, is that solely a product of the ventilation, or do other issues such as the building design fit into that?
Yeah, so we essentially start off, we would do a passive design study to see how the type of glazing in the building, the amount of glazing, any shading devices to prevent the sun getting into the building, and then you would look at the internals, such as the people in the building, although in a ward, that would probably be less of an influence. So certainly the building has a big influence on the energy performance.
Now, another issue that has been suggested might have had some influence on the discussions about air change rates was cost. Because on one view, if you build a system where you only have to provide 2.5 to 3 air changes an hour as opposed to a standard of 6, we've had that you can put in smaller ducting, different air handling units and so on. Was that a factor?
No, that wouldn't have been a factor in our design. We would have designed what we believe was needed to deliver the brief. And you say cost would have been affected, but I don't think we were considering that in the actual design.
As you probably have gathered from looking at the documents in preparation for this hearing, we did find a document, and if we could just have bundle 43, page 35, please. And this drove the question, if I might put it that way, Mr. Pardy. You've dealt with this, the whole question of value engineering in some detail in your statement, so I'm not going to pause long on this, but you can see that ward air change rate as a possible value engineering item does seem to have cropped up.
Yes, I can't recall that actually being added in, but clearly it was added in at that time. And I don't really know the reason why that was added in after this period of time. But yes, it was noted in there.
So your position, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm not picking it up, is that there would be an impact on cost in providing a lower air change rate, but that wasn't what drove the decision to do it.
That's correct.
Is that
That's
your
correct.
position?
There was no requirement to reduce cost through that.
You go on to touch on chilled beams, and I don't think we need to go to the guidance on chilled beams because we now know what the guidance was and what it is now, because things have moved on a bit, perhaps as a result of the experiences here. When we come to, let's move on back to your witness statement, go to page 10. You make the point which, as a content point, is not at issue, that the guidance has changed. Do you know what the concerns were that drove the change in guidance?
I believe it was due to the maintenance of the dual beams. And I'm not sure exactly what the problem was with the maintenance, but that was my understanding. That was what mainly drove the move away from dual beams.
And while we're on some of these slightly technical points, in the next paragraph you deal with something called thermal wheels. Now, the inquiry has heard these are essentially heat recovery devices.
That's right. Yes.
Designed to make that part of your system as efficient as possible. Is that a reasonable layman's summary?
They are. They recover heat from the, as most other similar devices, they recover heat from the exhaust air and then put it back into the supply air system. So you're actually not throwing the heat away. And
in paragraph 28, you say that the guidance permits the use of thermal wheels, and you say that they weren't used on critical care systems. Now, why not?
I think there was consideration over, whilst the carryover between supply and extract, or extract and supply, is very, very small, there was that concern that any slight carryover would be an issue in those areas.
Yeah. So again, just so we as lay people are understanding what is no doubt very obvious to you, the slight carryover point means there is a slight risk that something which might cause an infection or the like might be carried over. It's not a big risk, but there's a slight one.
It is a slight risk, yes, because you effectively trap the air in the wheel as it rotates, and whilst you should purge it out with there's a certain movement of the air, that's not always 100%.
Yeah. There's a mistype in my copy of the statement. Actually, in paragraph 28, I think the use was considered appropriate elsewhere, provided there was I think that should be a purge.
Yes, that's right. It should be a purge.
Surge.
Purge. Yes, I noticed that. Yes.
If you're not using this device in what you describe as critical care systems, would it be therefore appropriate to also exclude it from areas where people with compromised immune systems might be present?
Possibly, I'm not sure whether, I think we would have to take advice from that, from the board and their advisors. But there is a slight, if there is a slight chance of a carryover, that possibly could be a consideration.
I mean, I suppose that the way it's been put elsewhere in other hearings that we've had is that some have said to us, well, if there's a slight risk, you wouldn't take that slight risk where you are trying to protect people whose immune system is weaker.
Yeah.
Would that be a fair point?
Yes, I think that's reasonable.
When we're talking about carryover, could you just perhaps
Yes.
tease out what we're
So the air passes through this corrugated metal wheel, and that wheel rotates. So effectively, it heats the corrugated metal up as the air passes over, and then that moves into the other airstream, the incoming airstream, and that heat is then given up. But because it's of corrugations, there are slight air pockets which could trap the air as it rotates around from the extract into the supply. And the purge device should actually flush that those corrugations out before it moves into the supply air system. But so you're relying on this process of just effectively moving the air out of that wheel and the corrugations before you actually move it into the supply airstream. They should be very effective, but as with any dynamic device, there's always a slight chance that a pocket of the air could actually move between the extract and the supply.
Now let's move on a little. I'll just ask you one question in passing. I want to come back to the question of what you do and what you use to do what you do, if I can put that in broadest possible terms when you're designing a system. But at the foot of page 11, there's a small point raised about, well, what do you know about HEPA filters in Ward 2A? And then you say if they were a requirement, they would have been included in the design, and you left the project by the time of handover. When did your involvement cease?
Probably around about mid 2014.
And when you say if the filters were a requirement, where would you get that requirement from?
That would be from the employee requirements and the room data sheets.
when you're using the expression employer's requirements, do you have in mind the volume 2.1, which is part of the invitation to participate in dialogue, or are you including other information?
Essentially, I'm including that volume 2.1.
So it's essentially, when you're talking about employers' requirements, it's essentially volume 2/1.
That's correct.
Right, thank
you. You were asked basically, from what you recollect, who were Curry and Brown and what were they doing? Do you recall interacting with that firm?
We had very little direct interaction. We always worked through Multiplex, and they were, if we had a meeting with them, then certainly Multiplex were present.
Thank you. I want to take you to what the inquiry is called the ventilation derogation. So take nothing from that. It's just a convenient label that we have found broadly acceptable. And I should say before I ask Stevie the questions here, although you wouldn't necessarily be aware of it, it is a topic that the inquiry has looked at some length already, and at some length with a variety of witnesses. If I move past a point that you think I'm missing, please just intervene and say, we need to look at X or Y. That will be my fault. Can I just ask you a general question? I mean, I'm jumping in a sense to the conclusion. What was being discussed was the use of different air change rates and chilled beams. What parts of the hospital, so far as you were concerned, was it intended that that arrangement should apply to?
It would apply largely to the wards with the single bedrooms.
All wards?
I saw something the other day, and I believe it applied to the adult and children's wards.
Sorry, you believe that?
I did see a witness the other day mention this, and this topic came up, and I believe, and what we followed through was this applied to the adult and children's wards, general wards.
General wards.
You've just qualified that answer right at the end by talking about general wards. Part of the challenge, as you'll appreciate, is that nothing is written down which spells it out in simplistic terms. Does that mean there are wards that, so far as you were concerned, the proposed changes would not apply to?
Yes, I'm assuming there would be. I can't remember now exactly which wards it wouldn't have applied to, but that would have been pointed out in the ERs, the employer's requirements, I'm guessing.
So, what would, I mean, you're an experienced person in healthcare ventilation design. What kind of areas would not be covered, you would anticipate, by that?
Critical care would be one, the whole of critical care. Accident emergency would be another. Emergency department. Obviously, the specialist areas such as operating theatres, and anywhere else where there was a requirement that couldn't be met by the chill beams.
Right, give me that again. Anywhere else where
where you had definitive, for instance, the intensive care area would be one where you've got you don't want to rely on chill beams in that area because of the cooling loads. Things like operating theatres wouldn't. They would be a completely different type of system. Imaging areas. And any other area that had a different requirement.
Now, I think you've explained that you were familiar with the certainly the English health technical memoranda.
Yes.
Now, I think I'm right in saying that in the 2007 version of the English guidance, there is a table setting out various applications with various environmental parameters recommended in it.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So, just to understand your answer in relation to what the agreed ventilation derogation would not apply to, would I be right in thinking that where applications had particular environmental requirements, you would assume that the general ventilation derogation did not apply to them?
That's right, yes,
Right,
it's
thank
only
you.
applied to wards.
And you go on in paragraph, we'll go now to page 13, in fairness to you, so you have what's been written in front of you. We go now to paragraph 43, and you say the design, now that's the design that was being proposed, didn't follow the recommended air change rates given in the Scottish guidance. And I don't think we need to look at that up because we know it provides for 6
Yes.
as a standard, based on the discussion of use of chilled beams. And then you say the introduction gives us its purpose, giving advice and guidance. But you accept, I think, that when the employer's requirements were prepared, a number of guidance documents were put in a kind of look at these and take them into account box, and another into a mandatory box.
That's right.
And SHTM 0301 was in the mandatory box.
That's correct.
So what you were doing here was proposing a departure from something that the GGC side had said was going to be mandatory.
Yes, that's right.
And then you say, running on to 14, that the departure was discussed on the basis that rooms were generally single occupancy. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Who was having these discussions that you mentioned there?
I believe that that was put in the original bid proposal to use dual beams with this reduced air change rate.
Yeah. But I'm looking now for your reference to, the proposal being discussed, because we know there were exchanges. I'm just trying to get your understanding of who was discussing what.
Yes, I can't recall exactly the exact discussions that we had or who they were with. I just believe there was a process of discussion we went through, and I'm assuming that we had the technical advisor team had an input into that. Certainly, I believe that we spoke with Wallace Whittle between that period of that ventilation strategy paper being produced and being agreed. I'm certain we would have had that discussion. I believe we did. Just to run over the points.
You make the point at the top of that page that rooms were generally single occupancy. Now, can you help us understand why was that relevant when the guidance made it plain that single rooms were to have 6 air changes?
We believed it helped to give separation between the various patients. So whilst not in isolation, there was a physical separation between them, which would have helped. In terms of the air change rate being less, you wouldn't have to effectively purge the room as much. That was
But
it wasn't a consideration, but it was one of the factors that we pointed out.
But the mere fact that it's a single room isn't of itself a reason not to follow the guidance, is it?
No, the reason we put forward a shield beam system was partly to maintain the environmental temperatures in there, and also we had a sealed building situation with the, if I recall, the helipad was a significant factor with the downdraft and noise from it, so that led us to a sealed building. There was a sewage works just opposite, which had an impact. So we opt for a sealed building and then chill beams to actually maintain the temperature in the building. That's the direction we've been given from the employer's requirements, and that came together with the air volume needed to make those chill beams work was the 40 litres per second, which obviously equated to a lower air change rate overall.
Yes, when you say needed to make the chill beams work, we've had some evidence that the chill beams can essentially only cope with certain volumes of air. You can't put 10 air changes through them.
Yes, so that's right. They can only take to deliver the duty and operate correctly. They needed a maximum of 40 litres per second.
Yeah. And the other point you make at the top of that page is about a slight negative pressure.
Right, that's page 14.
14, it's the end of what is actually paragraph 43, Malone. Top of page 14 of the witness statement. Now, I wonder if you can help us with this. We've also had some evidence from others with elements of expertise that the idea of maintaining a slight negative or indeed a slight positive pressure is actually very difficult to achieve in practice because of the natural movements of pressure within an operating hospital. Would you agree?
I think possibly the term slight negative pressure is a way of describing essentially more extract than supply. I don't think you can't measure a slightly negative pressure, so that is correct. It would be a term that effectively drives us towards extracting more from the space than actually supplying, which gives you an inward airflow of air, and that would be only a very, very small negative pressure. It may not even be measurable, but it's a direction of airflow.
So was that an important part of what you were putting forward, having a negative pressure?
It was, I don't think it was an important part. It was maybe helpful. As soon as you open the door, obviously you lose that completely. So yeah, and you waft air from the room, vice versa, into the adjacent space.
And yeah, I think I picked you up saying, I apologize if on occasion I'm repeating something you've said, that you can't actually measure something that you described as a slight negative pressure.
You might measure it, but you may not measure it. Depends around the gaps around the doors. So yes, you can't. If you say you want a definitive negative pressure, then you have to obviously address it a different way.
Now, you say in paragraph 45, the design was accepted by the GGC project team, and you would say you expect that they undertook their own review. Is it not right to say you, IZBP, you were driving this suggestion in these discussions, were you not?
We were driving that, but we weren't the ultimate decision makers on that process. We provided the information needed or as requested to allow the board to actually come to a conclusion and acceptance.
And you say you had no involvement in the process by which it was being considered, is that right?
That's right. We provided the information to Curry Brown, Wallace Whittle, and then that was taken away. There may have been discussions between Multiplex and the board. I don't know. I'm not aware of that.
Sorry, missed that again. You explained to Mr. Connell that you put forward the proposal, providing the information, as you put it, but you had no direct, or in fact, no discussion with anyone on the GGC side.
We would have had a discussion with Wallace Whittle as our counterpart technical advisor on the ventilation strategy paper, but that's as far as that went. We didn't have
face-to-face discussion or what?
No, I suspect that was a telephone conversation. I don't recall a face-to-face discussion.
Right, so you would expect to have, and may not be a question you can answer. I mean, what would the discussion have been about?
I suspect that it was probably taken through the relevant points of our ventilation strategy paper. So we would have talked through the various points made in that paper.
Right. Thank you.
So you say in paragraph 45 that you would expect that that's GGC, undertook their own review with various technical advisors, including clinical and IPC advisors, but you don't know.
I don't know, no.
I asked that question because at one point there was a note in one of the versions of the log attributed to a Mr. Bushfield. And I think Mr. Bushfield is a bit dubious as to whether it was his comment at all, but attributed to Mr. Bushfield, I think you would know would be from Wallace Whittle.
I believe that's right.
Which in response to your proposal basically says no, and this would need IPC sign-off. Did you ever see any evidence that there was sign-off by the board's IPC team?
No, I don't think we saw any evidence as ZBP.
Well, let's have a quick look at this famous log, if we can, which is in bundle 17, page 824. Now, I just wanted to ask you about, I mean, the contents we've seen many times now. I've asked you about the relevance of single bedrooms. That appears in the middle of that narrative there. And then at the foot of the narrative, which you can take it from me is where the narrative stops, because then the log moves on to other things. It says, providing 6 air changes is energy intensive and not necessary. Now, that must be a comment that has originated with ZBP, I assume.
I can't recall actually. I'm guessing that, yes, we would have actually mentioned the energy intensity. And I think in the ventilation strategy paper, we actually suggested there would be a significant carbon saving with the proposal we made, which came back to the energy target that we had to meet.
I suppose that the point I need to put to you, since we've got you here, is that rightly or wrongly, the guidance then in place, both in Scotland and in England for that matter, provided for 6 air changes an hour, and you're dismissing it as not necessary.
I think the not necessary, I mentioned it in my notes, I think the not necessary, possibly not worded very well, but I believe that was not necessary to achieve the environmental conditions in the space, temperature predominantly. I think that's what that probably meant.
Sorry, just can I have that from you again? The not necessary may or may not be the perfect wording, but the meaning that you would attribute to that?
I believe that was related to maintaining environmental control of the space, temperature control of the space, because the chill beam could do it on the 40 litres per second. So I think that's what that was probably referring to.
So not necessary for
temperature control.
temperature control.
I think that's what it should have said.
Yeah, well, let's leave that document and go to the document you just referred us to, which is the ventilation design strategy, which is in bundle 16 at 1657. I suppose the first thing I have to ask you about this, it looks like a relatively short report from an expert or something of that kind. It was produced, or at least produced to other parties, around the 15th of December, which we know was something like 3 days before the contract was actually signed. Was a particular driver to get something in writing, or what was the reason why this was being produced at that, on the face of it, very late stage?
I can't recall exactly why we produced this note, but having looked at, I think you referred earlier to the clarification log, which wasn't accepted, and maybe this was somebody's asked us to actually produce a document to actually fill in the gaps with our proposal and to help others to come to a conclusion.
You'll understand by now this has been looked at by any number of individuals, and it narrates the 6 air changes an hour. But the driving factor, if I read it correctly, is this 26 degrees not being achieved in near the foot of the first page of the document, second paragraph under the heading mechanical ventilation.
That's right. That came from the earlier modelling that we did.
Yeah. And then, in fairness to you, you mentioned saving of carbon, and that appears on the next page of the document. If we just go on there, the saving is just above the heading conclusion. So you save about 9 kilograms per square meter. Then you go on to discuss natural ventilation, although natural ventilation has essentially been excluded by then, hasn't it?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. Now, the guidance, and we've debated this elsewhere, suggests that the purpose of having recommended air change rates covers a number of topics, including comfort and also dilution of anything that's needed diluted. Is that fair?
That's yeah, correct.
So it would be wrong, would it, to treat the air change rates as only dealing with comfort?
I think the dilution is referred to in the SHTM more for more specialised areas, because if you allow natural ventilation, it's a very variable air change rate, just relying on windows. Depends on wind pressure and how much the windows are open.
And at the foot of that paper, you then refer to two sources of guidance. One, Scottish building regulations, and two, CIBSE codes. Now, I think you have covered this, I think, in your witness statement, and I'll pick it up, I think, in paragraph 55 as we go on. But it's fair to say neither of these are specific to healthcare.
Not specific, but they are a requirement to be met. The CIBS guidance is guidance. The building regulations is obviously a regulation you need to comply with.
Well, just let's go back to your witness statement just to make sure I'm understanding what you say. Page 16, at paragraph 55, you say building regulations and CIBSE codes generally offer minimum standards. And the codes give guidance across a whole range of buildings. So these are kind of irreducible minimum rather than something that might be described as a better proposal.
They are minimums to meet the requirement for fresh air.
Yeah.
And
so would they be a reason to go with the proposal that you had put forward?
Not necessarily a reason, but they are supporting information.
Could I ask you about the second paragraph under conclusion? I don't know if you have the ventilation design strategy on your screen.
I'll put it.
Now, the recommended air change rate of 6 air changes an hour in the SHTM
Previous page. We need the first page of the ventilation strategy, please. Thank you.
No, the second.
Are you under the heading of mechanical ventilation?
My fault. The second page.
All right.
Second paragraph under conclusion. Now, the recommended air change rate is considered to relate to the ability to achieve an acceptable internal environment, i.e. 50 hours exceedance above 28 degrees centigrade. Where does that information come from? Where does that explanation come from?
I can't recall, actually. Certainly the 50 degrees C and 50 hours and 28 degrees C.
Again, can I ask you to keep your voice up?
Yeah, sorry, the 50 hours and 28 degrees C is certainly mentioned in the SHTM. I believe that was probably related back to the statement in the SHTM about maintaining comfort conditions for the patients.
So the answer to my question is that if I was to go to SHTM 0301, I would find the 6 air changes an hour explained solely in terms of an air change rate which would avoid a maximum of 20, or rather would keep the temperature within the space to less than 28 degrees centigrade on 50 hours in any year. I mean, I would find that explained.
No, I don't think you would, actually.
No.
I think that's possibly, I'm trying to think, because the 6 air changes generates a certain amount of air. If it's naturally ventilated and you're bringing outside air in through windows, or you're assisting that purpose. But it depends where you are in the UK and the type of building. So the actual 28 degrees C will be a factor of the way the building is designed to provide solar control of the building. the way the ventilation openings, if it's naturally ventilated, are designed to achieve that 6 air changes. So possibly that is not the right way of explaining that particular statement. I don't think you wouldn't find that statement in the SHTM, I believe.
Right. Do you have any understanding as to whether the I appreciate we're talking about the air change rate in general general wards. Do you have any understanding of a possible relationship between air change rate and infection control?
No, I don't think there's any. I don't think there's anything in the SHTM about air change rates infection control.
But you were aware from your familiarity with the HTMs that in certain areas of the hospital, and you give the example of critical care, higher air change rates than 6 are recommended.
Yes, and that's partly, for instance, if we take the intensive care areas, there's a lot of equipment in the intensive care area, typically 2 kilowatts of equipment per bed. So the air change rate is automatically driven by the need to provide more air to actually provide the cooling effect.
Right. Well, that, what I'm taking from this, and if I'm wrong, correct me, is that from your perspective, air change rates are solely connected to temperature control.
They are partly connected to temperature control. They're also partly connected to air movement. So in operating theatre, the air change rate obviously is high. That you've got open wounds in operating theatre, so you are obviously can't get the air moving a lot. But also you're trying to cascade the air from the operating room to the corridor. So the air change rate is partly needed to actually drive that air movement. So that temperature control is a big one, but there's also the need to actually drive the direction of airflow.
Again, if I'm wrong, correct me. At least in the example of theatres, that would your answer would seem to indicate to me that you had an understanding that it had to do with the direction of flow of the air, and therefore the carrying away of potentially infective material from, for example, medical staff.
Yes, it's to keep the wound site clear of any contamination from the operating
So I've got
staff.
that right.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
And dilution of anaesthetic gases. That's the other one, of course.
Yeah, if we leave your paper for the moment and go back to your witness statement, I want to ask you a couple of things. Can you help us at all as to what discussions UIZBP had with anyone representing the board about this proposed strategy?
I believe we would have only discussed this with Wallace Whittle as the technical deviser, M&E engineer for the acting on behalf of the board.
And can you help us at all? I think His Lordship may already have asked you this, as to what the content of those discussions with Wallace Whittle was. You know, who was saying what were the issues?
Well, I think we would have we would probably ask to produce that paper to help the process of actually getting sign off, and we would have talked through the content of that paper with Wallace Whittle or others to explain why we'd written what we'd written.
So
and
if
then
that's
answer any
right,
questions that they may have had at the time.
apologise for interrupting you. If that's right, that would have been on or after the 15th of December when it was put into circulation.
It would have been around about that time, yes.
On the face of it, it doesn't give a great deal of time for analysis, debate, checking, reports or anything like that before the contract is signed, does it?
No, I don't know where they'd got to with their own conclusions in terms of did this paper help to just complete their view of the proposal. Yes.
Mr. Pardy, you may have been asked this already, in which case I apologize. We think the paper was shared with Wallace Whittle on or about the 15th of December. Had you put forward your proposal earlier than that? Initially?
Yes, our initial proposal, I believe, was in the bid documents in terms of how we
Right.
intended to deal with the wards.
And the initial response, as is recorded in the log and as is recorded in Mr. Bushfield, I'm calling it Mr. Bushfield's comment, was rejection of your
Yes, I
proposal.
saw that. Yes, yes.
When did the change come from rejection to acceptance?
I'm assuming it was the final clarification log was that concluded that round of discussions and decision making.
Because in fact, the paper that we've been looking at, it's not just that it was put into circulation, it actually dated the 15th of December in 2009, is that correct?
If that's right, I couldn't see a date on it myself.
You can take it from me, it's dated
Yeah, that's fine.
the
Yes.
15th. And in terms of the questions his lordship was asking you about, what's this guidance for? You've obviously been asked that in the course of your questionnaire, and your reply is set out in paragraph 50 of your witness statement. You say it's driven by clause 4.1, which is one of the introductory paragraphs. And you say ventilation is for comfort, and then specialist ventilation, it's also provided in some areas. And then you say ventilation is also noted as controlling air movement to contain, control, and reduce hazards from airborne contaminants, dust, and harmful microorganisms. So you would accept that the guidance mentions these purposes for.
That's correct. Yes, it does mention that.
In fairness to you, you had an issue about whether the phrase "not necessary" was well framed, and you deal with that at the top of page 16 on your witness statement, what is part of paragraph 51. So I don't need to ask you about that again. And then you accept it's a derogation. Would I be right in understanding that in these exchanges, you understood that GGC were relying on Wallace Whittle? They weren't relying on you particularly?
No, they were relying on their technical advisor team.
And well, just so we're clear, apart from Wallace Whittle, were you aware of anyone else with knowledge of these matters involved in the discussions?
No, I don't think I'm aware of that. I've assumed that that would have been taken to whoever was needed to contribute to this decision.
Now in paragraph 53, you touch on the point that you've made already, that you weren't part of the discussion process, so you don't know what discussions there were. And in 54, I think we come back to Wallace Whittle as your point of contact for discussion. And you say you remember the strategy was discussed with the reasoning behind the proposal, which you think may have been once the paper was produced. Is that correct?
That's right.
And then the point about minimum standards we've already seen. And you don't know whether any risk assessment was done. That's not something you were involved in.
No, we weren't involved in that.
Well, let me move on to another topic, if I may, unless my lord has any further questions on the derogation. I'd just like to go to a topic that you don't directly deal with, perhaps indirectly, but not directly deal with in your witness statement, which is the process which goes on to enable you to produce a ventilation design for a healthcare facility, and ultimately for it to end up, as we were hearing from other witnesses, in something called construction drawings. And what we were hearing from other witnesses, once you've got the construction drawing, you don't go back and work out the whys and wherefores of the discussion that preceded it. You just go on and build it. and you check whether you're building what's on the drawing. So I'm looking to the point before we get to something called construction drawings. I'm going to ask you, as you'd expect, about some specific areas, but just taking it generally, in a project of this kind, what information do you have access to that allows you to design a ventilation system?
We would look at the layout of the space, and starting off, it would go through a series of steps, generally following the RIBA stages. That's Royal Institute of British Architects, and they set down a certain level of information to be delivered at a certain time. The team are interested in how much space the ventilation systems will take up. That's the ceiling voids, the riser space and the plant space. So in the very early days, we have to make some general assumptions on the 1 to 500 plans, for instance. We would just get a feel for the areas and just make some initial assessments. And as we move into the next stage, we would then, the 1 to 200 stage, we would start to see the shape of the departments become available, and then we would apply the requirements to individual rooms. And then as the 1 to 50 process moves in, after that process, we then start locating the various elements and doing the final calculations. Effectively, it's a fine-tuning process you go through. Ultimately, we rely on the employer's requirements as guidance, and the room data sheets will come into effect at some point, or the ADB sheets. Okay,
yes. Well, let me just ask you to pause your answer there, just so his lordship can get each of these elements.
I'm very interested in understanding this, Mr. Pardy. So if you could, as I say, take it quite slowly, and things may seem self-evident to you, which are not necessarily self-evident to me.
You look at the employer's requirements. Is that one of the things that you said?
Yes, you would look at the employer's requirements. That would be one of the key briefing documents. And then you would look at the room data sheets. You look at the guidance, the SHTMs, and then you would do the assessment of how the building's performing in terms of its massing, its shading, solar control, etc. But that's not necessarily done at the beginning, all done at the beginning, because you have to, as you develop the whole building, it's an interactive process that you are actually effectively refining the design from an early concept through to ultimately construction drawings. But our design would have finished and been handed over to Mercury as the subcontractors to actually develop into the installation drawings. So I think our drawings were they were coordinated as in respect to actually fitting in the space, but they wouldn't necessarily have shown the exact routes that we did. That was our arrangement.
How do the room data sheets fit into this process?
So the room data sheets will record the requirements for that room, the temperature, the air change rate, the pressure, any filtration rates. That's all the standard fields.
Again, can I just take that? The room data sheets will record the requirements for that room. Temperature,
ventilation. If that's pressure.
When you say ventilation, what do you mean?
A ventilation rate.
Right. So that's the air change.
That's the air change rate, yes. Or however we would have actually described that at the time. I think we used the 40 litres per second in many of the rooms rather than an air change rate. Humidity, filtration requirements, relative pressures between spaces. Then it goes on to lighting, water temperatures, etc., and then you get the architectural elements.
And who prepares the room data sheets? Do you have a role in that?
I couldn't remember us preparing. I think we started off with this pack of ADB sheets, which were generated. I think they were part of the ERs, which are basically pulled from the NHS database. And I saw some conversation last week on the environmental matrix, which I couldn't remember us providing, but we clearly did, because it was it was mentioned about the COBOL system, which I'm familiar with. I can't remember us actually doing that exercise, but we obviously did, where we actually inputted. So the COBOL system allows you to export the rooms and the various fields that we have to fill in, and we would have had that export from Nightingale's, filled in the various elements for the rooms, fields, and then fed that back to Nightingale's, which then formed the completed room data sheet. So we would have filled in all those fields, generally using the ADB sheet as the starting point, unless we'd varied it. Obviously, the 40 litres per second was a variance to the whatever's in the ADB sheet.
The 40 litres a second had been suggested to be essentially a lift from the phrase, its use in the ventilation log. Would that be correct?
Sorry, I didn't understand the lift.
Sorry, my apologies. The 40 litres a second was used in discussions at the time of the ventilation derogation.
That's right, yes.
Am I right in thinking that the room data sheets did not contain air changes per hour figures, but if they contained anything, it would be a reference to 40 litres a second?
That's right, yes, yes.
And that's because, is it, that was the figure that was discussed at the time of the derogation?
Correct, yes. We'd use that as effectively a fixed figure.
And how do the room data sheets relate to the employer's requirements?
They should reflect the employer's requirements.
And whose job is it to make sure they do?
That will be the board's.
The board's?
Well, we would actually fill them in with what we understood to be the agreed requirements, criteria, and then they would be passed to the board for sign-off.
Again, bear with me. The production of room data sheets is a contractor's responsibility. Is that right?
I believe in this case it was.
Right. And Nightingale's would have a responsibility. Did you, I mean, you mentioned examples of information which would appear, as I understand it, on what we've been referring to as page 4 of a room data sheet, the temperature, air change rate, humidity, filtration. Now, is it ZPM that is putting that information onto every room data sheet?
That's correct. We would do that.
Right. Yes. So this is, and you're drawing that information from the employer's requirements, which is the volume 2, oblique 1.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The relevant guidance documents. Anywhere else?
And the agreed contract position, for instance, the move away from the 6 air changes, that would have been then reflected in the room data sheets.
Bearing in mind the ventilation derogation.
Yes, that's right. We would have.
And this process is going on post-contract.
Yes, that's right. I can't remember exactly when it went on exactly, but it would have been over a period of time. So in the early, we would still be in our early design phase. The room data sheets wouldn't have been available, but we'd been working to what we knew was going to go in them at that time. And then the room data sheets, I don't know how, I can't remember how long that took to actually do that process, but it was probably over several months of a lot of information to fill in. In terms of the team, some of the team would have filled in the temperature and the ventilation, being the mechanical engineers. They would have been passed to the electrical engineers to put in lighting details, and then there would be the public health engineers, which would do any other elements such as water temperatures. And that would then be sent back to Nightingale's in an Excel spreadsheet form as the export, and then they would have imported it into the codebook system to actually form what you would actually see as an output.
Right. So if I can take step back to the Excel spreadsheet, the mechanism in which the mechanical and electrical engineers pass information to Nightingale's as architect, who are responsible for actually drafting or completing the room data sheet, is by filling in an Excel spreadsheet. You said you couldn't remember having produced an environmental matrix, but you assumed that you did.
I believe we would have done that. I haven't seen. Couldn't record it when I did my witness statement, because I think I said I didn't know who produced it, but haven't seen the last week's witness.
Right. And when you talk about the Excel spreadsheet, that is the same thing as we're talking about when we talk about an environmental matrix.
I think that's what we probably called it. Yes, yes.
So,
because I think that's what we probably called it, the environmental matrix, because it presented all the environmental information in one place.
As I say, I'm quite interested in making sure that I understand the steps in concrete form, as it were. Mr. Connell.
And the information on ventilation that you are, let me use the word, inserting at the moment. Did I get you correctly to say that that should be what the employer's requirements specify, subject of course to the derogation change?
Yes, I believe that's right.
And should it also comply with guidance? I think that was another source you mentioned.
It should do, yes.
And can I ask you then, let me put this as a general question, clinical output specifications. First of all, are you familiar with that topic?
Yes, yes.
Now, the architect, Emma White, told us, and I'll be interested in your view, that because these are led by teams, the makeup of which may vary from place to place and ward to ward, the nature of what somebody thinks is a clinical output specification may also vary. Some will be more detailed on technical matters, some much less so. More detailed on activities, some less so. Is that your experience?
I think that I haven't got as much experience as Emma would have had in clinical output space. There's a lot of it to do with the actual spatial planning. But yes, because they're written by different departments, I don't think there's a standard format that you actually follow. So it's generally more of a report in terms of how they want to see things or how they use the space.
And as a designer of ventilation for the healthcare area, how do you go about coping with the fact that some are more detailed on technical matters, some are not? What do you do to try and work out what the correct ventilation solution is for the area covered by the clinical output specification?
Sometimes it's we have to read between the lines as such. So if it's not absolutely clear, we have to put down what we believe is right and then feed that back to the relevant department for confirmation that actually our interpretation is right, because often it's down to interpretation of what we believe is right with the information we have in front of us.
In this contract, as we understand it at least, the clinical output specifications became part of the employer's requirements. Do you remember that?
I believe they were, yes.
Can you recall, and we'll turn to some specifics shortly, but can you recall having to do this sort of loop back to the drafters of the clinical output specification in this project?
I can't recall that. We would have fed back the design process that we'd been through with our solutions to the board, and then I assume that they would have then taken it to the various departments. We wouldn't have had direct contact with those departments unless there was a specific reason.
Okay, well, let me see if you can help me with the process then, because we've heard that as design was starting after contract had been signed, there were things called user group meetings taking place. Were you aware of that?
I was, yes.
And the user group meetings, as we've been told, and please feel free to correct anything that I put to you, as we've been told, the one topic they were not talking about was ventilation.
I suspect that was correct. The user group meetings normally concentrate on room relationships, room sizes, and ultimately the actual room layout.
Yeah. So room adjacencies, room sizes, room layouts. We've heard about where the furniture should go, essentially, what kit was needed in a particular room, topic like that. Would that
Yes,
your
that's
recollection?
right. And invariably, those user group meetings
And
concentrate on that.
the information we have, and again, open to correction by you, is that not only were they not discussing ventilation, but they were never looking at documents which had air change rates per hour written on them anywhere. Would that be correct?
At the user group meetings, possibly not. Somebody else will have looked at those.
The reason I ask is that, for instance, it's been suggested if an experienced person came along to a UGM to discuss, bed layouts or something, but happened to see 2.5 air changes written in big print at the top of a document, they might go, well, I'm not here to discuss this, but what's that about? But our information is that they didn't have that sort of incidental information and didn't discuss ventilation.
The room data sheets may not have been available at the time of the user group meetings. That may be in a parallel process.
Well, let's come to the parallel process, because I'm keen to understand that by the time design was continuing, detailed design of rooms, in that parallel process, can you recall who was participating wearing a GGC hat?
In the user group meetings, or
Not in the user group meetings, because they contain a large number of people.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes.
The suggestion is there is some other thing going on, and we've had some names who recollect being given things to sign and so on and so forth. But I wondered what your take was on who was participating in parallel discussions that might deal with ventilation.
I can't recall anyone specifically who was involved in that process.
The evidence that we've been given by people like Mr. Hall of Curry and Brown is that it's twofold. One, I thought there was nobody involved from the board who was a ventilation engineer in these detailed discussions. Does that accord with your recollection?
I can't remember who was involved with that process. I would expect someone with knowledge would have actually seen those documents.
Well, what Mr. Hall says is that if anything was signed off, because we can understand if you're deciding where the beds are going in the user group meetings, someone needs to write down that we're all agreed about that. That's fine. But if anything was signed off, which might have touched on ventilation, all GGC were doing was reviewing what he described as clinical functionality, which is a term which is defined in the contract and covers adjacencies and lots of these other topics. Now, does that accord with your recollection?
Again, I can't recall that process. I would be surprised if somebody wasn't looking at the technical side of it.
Because we're trying to understand, as not only we're going back a long time, but also as outsiders to the process, how this was working. The user group meetings, we can follow. Someone comes along, says, I don't want that room here, I want it somewhere else. The treatment room needs to be next door. We need medical gases supplied to this room, so on. Fine. But when we're getting into ventilation, let's be quite clear about it. Mr. Hall's position is that there was only one party responsible for design of the ventilation system, and that was ZBP.
In that respect, that's correct. We were responsible for designing the ventilation system, but we were not responsible for signing it off. It would have been signed off as part of a pack of information that we submitted, as this is our proposals, and that would have been reviewed by someone.
Can you help us at all about
Sorry,
this?
can I just see I've got that answer?
Sorry, go back to your previous answer, ignore me.
I'm sorry, I may be interrupting this very question. It was the reference to signed off that I had lost contact with. Maybe it'd be better, Mr. Connolly, if you pursue that.
I'm trying to get to the answer here. As I may have indicated to various witnesses, Mr. Pardy, we're trying to work out where things may or may not have worked terribly well, possibly, and what it might be possible to suggest could be done to improve them. Now, let me go back and sort of reapproach this. User group meetings, we follow that. Sign off means we agree where the bed goes. Fine. The parallel discussion, because ventilation is not discussed at the user group meetings, I think you accepted, first of all, that you were responsible for the design, you being ZBP.
That's correct, yes.
Now, Mr. Hall's position is that he repeatedly told people, including ZBP and anyone from Multiplex who would listen, that all the board were ever doing in these discussions was signing off either to show that it had gone through a process or for clinical functionality. What they were not doing was taking your design and subjecting it to some checking or analysis or whatever to say, yes, our experts say this is the right thing to do ventilation-wise. So I'm keen to understand what you understand, your position is. You said that you were responsible for design, but it had to be signed off. Can you explain to his lordship what you understood was happening when you refer to it being signed off?
So we would have expected that the initial design effectively reflect what we're looking for through the process is that we've got it right. And therefore we are relying on the information that's given to us at the beginning, the employer's requirements, and interpret that to a design. But ultimately, it's an interpretation. We need confidence that we've actually got it right. And therefore, there has to be a process of sign-off, approval, various ways of describing that. But somebody on the board side must say that, yeah, this is exactly what we want, and this will deliver the service that we need. I can't remember who that person was or that party was. I would be surprised that there was nobody in place because it's such a fundamental part of the building. The services must work.
Well, we've identified a number of people whose signatures appeared. One of them was Mr. Hall, who's a project manager, not a ventilation engineer, as he told us more than once. He wouldn't, of his own knowledge, be the kind of person you would expect to agree that your proposal is the right thing for a particular area, would he?
Yes, right. He wouldn't be qualified, I believe, to. He may need some of it, but ultimately he wouldn't have the knowledge to be able to do that.
And what about other members of the GGC project team, Mr. Moyer or someone like that?
I can't recall Mr. Moyer and what his expertise was, but there will be someone with the necessary experience and knowledge to go through that whole building and say, yes, we agree that is exactly what we need. It reflects what our current methods of working are.
Mr. Connell, it appears to me this is quite an important passage. I wonder if I could just ask you to give me what you've said in the last 2 minutes at dictation speed, with apologies for intervening, Mr. Connell. This passage began with Mr. Connell's question that you had said the design had to be signed off, and you gave an answer which I heard, but rather faster than I could note.
Right.
So could I just ask you to give it to me a little more slowly?
Yeah, so we, and hopefully I'll get it in exactly the same way I suppose mentioned before. But yes, we would have expected the whole proposals to be agreed and signed off by the board, so that we knew with confidence that we were moving into the next stage of design with the right systems, the right criteria in place. And generally, we'd met the brief.
And I think when you first answered the question, what you considered your design initially to be was your interpretation of what the board required by way of its
That's right.
employer's requirements.
Mm.
However, I'm hearing a degree of diffidence, as it were. You're looking for a check that your interpretation meets the board's.
That's yes.
What they
Yes,
were
what they've
wanting.
asked for, and because of the employer's requirements were, I recall, relatively high level, we would have then taken what we knew from, there may have been some mentions of the user group meet about certain things which we'd have picked up on. We'd have looked at the guidance that we were directed to. We'd have had the contract agreements in place, and then combine that into a pack of information, probably in the form of drawings, schematic drawings representing the components of the system. There may have been some technical specifications at that time. And then there would be the room data sheets would be the final element to effectively play back to the board. This is what we understand you need to deliver the hospital service that you're asking for.
Now, when you first gave your answer, as part of my very inadequate note, I think you said this was our interpretation, therefore there has to be, and I think I'm quoting you back, there has to be someone on the board side who said that. My note gives up at that point, but I think
Yes.
you said that your interpretation was correct.
That's right. Yeah. So our interpretation of the requirements is correct, and that we can move on to the next stage. What we don't want to do is get to the end and find out we've interpreted something wrong.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Collins.
Right, if I can just try and finish this passage, if I may. If I go back and I just keep using the user group meetings as a convenient sort of touchstone, we know there were a number of iterations of user group meetings, but the idea was everybody came together, worked out what they thought the answer was, and agreed it, whether in one meeting or two. I don't get the impression, I'd like to be clear from you, that in any discussions that you had with anyone wearing a board hat over ventilation at this time, you were talking to anyone of a kind of specialist qualification nature. So you might have been talking to Mr. Hall or Francis Rath or whoever. Is that correct? Because what one can see if you're in a user group meeting and you're talking to a nurse from the area you're talking about, you know that that person knows where the bed should go. I'm sorry, I'm not intending to be pejorative about that as an example. But if you're talking about ventilation and you're saying, here we are, here's some stuff about ventilation for these rooms. You say that that was your interpretation of what you thought the board wanted you to produce. What are you as ZBP saying to the recipient of that information, first of all? I mean, are you saying we need you guys to go and confirm this is what you want? Because we haven't found anything that says that anywhere.
I think the user group meetings we don't contribute a huge amount to, because we're there to listen and take notes. We may ask the various questions when we're not clear about what they need, and it may have been ventilation. I don't know. There's various members of the team went to the user group meetings. We split them up amongst us. So we would have asked those questions where relevant. Often we would have gauged that the people in the user group meeting probably couldn't answer those questions, and I can't remember how we actually forwarded those questions to the board, but we would have come back with a pack of information and presented back at some point during that process for agreement.
And who did you present back to?
I can't recall who that would have been. But we would have done some, whether we actually physically presented or we actually put a bundle of information together that went back through multiplex to the board. There would have been a process, I'm guessing.
I didn't catch that last answer.
Yeah, with a pack of information, a series of drawings, documents would have gone back to multiplex, and then that would have been forwarded to the board for review and agreement. And there may have been some questions coming out of that, or we may have met on specific topics. I can't recall exactly at that time.
And again, I mean, do you recall meeting ventilation engineers sitting on the other side of the table to discuss these issues?
No, I don't recall that. It may have not been me personally. It may be one of the other members of the team did that.
But if somebody was to come back to you and say, well, we've carried out our own analysis on the ventilation system for room X, which is for purpose Y, and we have assessed this as correct, would that not require the kind of skills that, in effect, you were bringing to the table, the skills of a ventilation engineer, specialist ventilation engineer?
Sorry, could you just repeat that in terms of the actual who would actually come back?
Well, it's a badly framed question. Let me try it again. Assuming you were not in this process, and as you said, it might have been in writing rather than at meetings. Let's assume there was a meeting and you were sitting with, I don't know, a project manager or a member of the project team. You say you were expecting someone to go away and come back and tell you whether you've got it right, your interpretation is correct, you've correctly reflected the board requirements. If it wasn't happening in that meeting, would that not need to go somewhere else to someone with ventilation design skills?
Yes, it would. We'd expect somebody of fully knowledgeable in what we were proposing to actually review what our proposals were and agree that they were right or disagree that they were wrong and come back with a commentary on those proposals, which we would then take on board and then would resubmit that for final sign off. Effectively, we need that sign off before we can move on.
And do you know where you were expecting the board to get that advice from?
I'm not sure exactly, but I would expect they would go to their technical people, whether that's the estates team or the people who run the individual departments who are knowledgeable in that process.
And do you recall, or do you not, being told by Mr. Hall that when the board signed off, it only did for clinical functionality?
I don't recall that. No. It may have been said when I wasn't present, but it could have been said direct to multiplex. We weren't involved in that process.
I think this might be an appropriate point to pause for.
Right. We usually take a coffee break about 11:30. So could I ask you to be back for 12 o'clock?
Certainly.
Mr. Connell.
Thank you, my Lord. Mr. Pardy, I'm keen that I get the best understanding that the inquiry can of your evidence about the process for approval, as you have it, of design. So if you don't mind, I'm going to come back to that. And if I go over ground again, apologies. Your position is that you don't remember being told that if the board signed anything off, it was only for clinical functionality. You don't recall that?
No, I don't recall that. No.
I'll come to the process itself in a second. What was, so far as you recall, the output of that process? In other words, how did you know that from your account, somebody had been through your interpretation, assessed it, analysed it, taken advice on it, and come back and said, yes, that's correct?
I can't recall actually what the actual outcome was, but I would have expected to receive a series of comments against the various pieces of documentation, whether that be drawings, specifications, and then we would have acted on those and then got final agreement before moving on to the next stage of design. But I can't remember the exact
So you'd
happening.
So you'd expect a response,
Yes,
probably noted on drawings.
there may be a combination of written commentary or marked up drawings. Often you get marked up drawings is one way of
And
conveying the
do you
response.
recollect seeing such responses?
No, I can't remember seeing that, but that doesn't say we didn't have it. I just can't remember.
Sorry, Mr. Connell.
So this parallel process, parallel to the user group meetings, did I pick up from one of your earlier answers that you now can't remember whether it was done in meetings or possibly in writing via multiplex or some other route?
I can't remember that, but that's only there may have been meetings to discuss the proposals, or there would have almost certainly been written information, documentation, drawings to form that pack.
You understand the issue I've got here, Mr. Pardy, that I'm trying to, this is quite important potentially. You interpret the employer's requirements in a particular way, and you say somebody to check that and tell you whether that's agreed.
Yes, we would have expected that, and multiplex would have certainly required that, because it then forms a way to go forward. Because if you haven't got it right at that stage, it can lead to all sorts of complications at a later date.
Indeed. So, and in fact, one of the multiplex witnesses suggested that in light of what had transpired in this hospital, it'd be quite good before anybody started pouring concrete to have a sort of loop back to say, pause, this is what we've got for this bit. And we all agreed about that, and so on. But that's not what was happening.
Right.
So let me just think of it a little more conceptually. If you are the designers and the design responsibility is, well, it's multiplexes, but
yes,
we're not going into the distinction between multiplex and the subcontractors for the purpose of this. If somebody else does the work and comes back and say, no, we don't agree with you, we need A, B, and C, does that not make them the designers and them responsible?
No, ultimately they are passing comment. As engineers, we debate things between us. That happens. If we don't understand or we have a different point of view, we talk that through, and we come to a conclusion at the end, and that is the agreed position. Whether it's sometimes a compromise. Sometimes it's a case of, well, we didn't realise that is the situation. We'll take that on board, or the other party may say, well, actually, that's not a bad point. We think that could work. But ultimately, design responsibility sits with us and multiplex.
And do you, I mean, I appreciate now it's a long time ago, but do you recollect any such discussions, debates, friendly discussions over who was right about what or why actually happening?
No, I can't actually recall that at all. I did see one of the witnesses the other day suggesting there was some discussion in August of 2010, but I can't recall those conversations. It wouldn't surprise if that happened. It would be normal practice to have some sort of discussion around the proposals.
Yeah, I think there is a suggestion that some form of workshop took place in August 2010, which may have been attended by Wallace Whittle. We're still to hear from Mr. McKechnie. The room data sheets wouldn't have been all available by then, would they?
I'm not sure. I would have expected them to be substantially complete by then. Maybe a first draft would have come out. I can't remember when the room data sheets were effectively finalised.
Do you remember any feedback to the effect that Wallace Whittle have approved your design?
No, I can't remember that as such. But I think there was some. I saw something the other day. Put on the screen. There was some comments made, and I assume that that's what sort of feedback we got.
Well, let me try and look at some specifics. Now, you've said in your witness statement that at this distance you can't immediately remember all the different wards and what they were all meant to be for. So, in relation to Ward 4B, if you take it from me, that was intended to be a hemato-oncology ward. Now, you would have got then a clinical output specification for Ward 4B, is that right?
Yes.
And can we see bundle 161595, please? Now, we can let you read through this if you wish, but if you take it from me that that's the clinical output specification, as it says, for the hemato-oncology ward, which we've got accustomed to calling Ward 4B. And it starts by telling the reader that a high proportion of the patients receive chemotherapy and are immunocompromised, making them vulnerable, and they need a protected environment. And then at the foot of the page, a reference to higher than average need for infrastructure, no opening windows, no chilled beams, space sealed, positive pressure to rest of hospital, HEPA filtered probably, and so on. Now, I'm assuming that is a document that you would have received as part of your consideration of the employer's requirements.
Yes, if that was part of the employer's requirements, we would have seen that document.
And would do two things, would it not? It would tell you what at least one batch of clinicians thought were needed for immunocompromised patients, correct?
Yes.
And also, in this case, actually give you some suggestions as to the kind of environment that they needed.
That's correct, yes, yes.
Now, should that ward, because we know ultimately it was changed, should that ward as originally designed have had 10 air changes an hour in its room?
I'd have to look at the guidance to see what they recommend for that. But if 10 air changes was required, then we would have provided that.
Sorry, could you just repeat your question, Mr. Connell? Did you say did or should?
Should.
Should. Right. Thank you.
The reason I ask that is that this looks like a specialized area rather than a general ward. Would you agree?
Yes, yes, it's not a general ward.
And you wouldn't therefore expect to provide 2.5 air changes within that ward?
No, you wouldn't.
And would it surprise you to know that it wasn't provided with 10 air changes, but rooms outside the isolation rooms did have 2.5 air changes?
That is a surprise. I didn't recall that.
And do you know why that was the position?
No, other than we would have, we would have filled in the room data sheets going back to the our interpretation. Now, whether our interpretation is right or wrong, we would have probably put that in, and maybe it was misunderstood that it was a standard ward with certain specialised rooms in there.
I mean, the
Sorry, Mr. Pardy, could you give me that answer?
Yes,
give me that answer again.
we may have not appreciated that it applied to various rooms. We'd expected the room data sheets to confirm the requirements.
I wanted to ask you specifically because there was something in your witness statement that we hadn't seen elsewhere, which was that you may have assumed that when there was mention of immunocompromised people, they would all be in isolation rooms, and everything else could therefore be a standard room. Is that something?
Yes, I did make that statement without
did?
seeing all the documentation
Yeah.
many years ago.
No.
Yeah.
It's just I wanted to ask you about that because why would you make that assumption? What would be the basis for you assuming, without further material, that anyone who was immunocompromised would be put in an isolation room and all the other rooms could be ordinary rooms?
I suppose it's, and I don't know how you treat immunocompromised patients. It's not within my expertise, but I've always assumed that a lobby or airlock to the room was needed to give you maximum separation from the general corridor. Whereas a standard room, we just HEPA filtering, and as soon as you open the door, then you obviously bring outside air into that room.
Again, with apologies, can I take you through your answers again? As you confirmed, Mr. Connell, the clinical output specification for what was at that stage intended to be designated 4B, and I think later became 4C. Have I got that the right way around?
Well, the patient cohort that was intended to be in 4B was moved to 4C when the bone marrow transplant unit was introduced for adults.
Right. But now, you accepted from Mr. Connell that what is described there is a ward for immunocompromised patients, and therefore you would expect whatever is the recommended environmental parameters from SHTM, which is appropriate to an immunocompromised population. Mr. Connell then pointed out that outside the isolation rooms, the air change rate was 2.5 with no pressure differential to the corridor. And you said that's a surprise to you because you had expected the room data sheet to have identified that this ward would require the level appropriate to immunocompromised patients as set out in the SHTM. Now, if it is the case that the room data sheet did not do that, as I've understood from your previous evidence, that would be an error on the part of ZBP.
It would have been, yes, it would have been, we may not have picked up that requirement. I can't remember exactly where we were with that.
Now, again, thinking of your earlier answers, is your position that you understood at the time that that room data sheet would have been distributed to GGC through multiplex, and when I say to GGC, perhaps to whoever was advising them for checking?
Yes, yes, we were expected that.
That was your understanding
That
at
was
the time.
that we, yeah, yes.
Sorry, Mr. Cole.
Yeah. So that the one possible explanation for what appears to have arisen, I have one further small point to ask you about it, but one possible explanation is that for whatever reason, the interpretation that ZBP had applied to the employer's requirements in this case didn't pick up what needed to be picked up, but nobody else picked it up and corrected you on it.
That's right. I don't know what the original, because we would have started off with the ADB sheet as well, which was actually delivered as part of the ER. So if that was wrong, we may have well followed that through and made this element of this clinical aspect.
I think in fairness, I probably need to put to you, I think Miss White thought that one possible explanation for some of the issues that had arisen was that the ADB sheets, which were designed as sort of off-the-shelf standard specifications for particular rooms, didn't always fit every detailed requirement and may have got more importance than they deserved.
Yes, I think that's my thoughts as well. They may have picked one off the shelf for a room, and it was actually we followed that through.
Can I just ask you one other detailed point? It may not matter too much in the result, but one of the issues that we've discussed in earlier evidence to the inquiry is whether you need a backup air handling unit in an area where the patients are immunocompromised, and therefore a failure of the unit not just makes life a bit uncomfortable, but can cause them serious health problems. Do you think this ward should have had a backup air handling unit?
That's one option. The other option is to have the most likely component to fail is going to be a fan. So you could have backup fans. That would be the other option.
So
yes, it depends. It depends what the failure element is within the air handling unit. There would obviously have to be some downtime for routine maintenance, but that would have been picked up as part of a planned process, so that there would have been a procedure in place.
So if you were designing the air handling, the ventilation system for a ward of this kind, you would expect to at least look at how the patients could be protected in the case of equipment breakdown or downtime.
Yes, you would actually, again, understand from the estates team how they deal with it at the moment.
That's an example of somebody who, in writing a clinical output specification, has gone a reasonable distance into the technical ventilation side, although they haven't specified an air change rate. Can I ask you to look at the clinical output specification for Ward 2A, which I think even then was being called the Schihalian unit, which is the bundle 161599. Now, again, if you require to read this, we can accommodate that, but take it from me, if you would, that this is the clinical output specification for the Schihalian unit. Yeah. This, on the narrative I was giving you earlier about different styles, is you've got a lot more chat about what they do, how the patients move, all the different things that they do, and a lot less chat about what is required to protect them. Would you agree?
Yes, that's right. Yes, yes.
Now, here you are. Here's a specialist service for children with serious cancers, including various particular facilities and bone marrow transplant. What do you do faced with that specification to try and come up with the right design?
Well, again, you would do the interpretation of what was in there, and then feed it back as part of our proposals.
On one view, would you not need to provide at least the kind of protections that the adult hematology ward was asking for your positive pressure and sealed rooms and all that stuff.
It depends, because that's the first page. I don't know.
No, well, please,
If
let's
there's
move on to the
something
second
further
page.
down, I'm sure. I thought there was.
Are you
something
looking for
further.
something in particular? Could we confirm?
Yeah, I think it was page. I think it's section 7. I think it was.
Yep.
If I remember rightly, having looked at
That-
this yesterday.
That's on.
There we are.
There we are. Yeah. Now, that's a good page to go to because, first of all, it identifies that this author has not produced the list of technical requirements that the author of the other one did.
Mm.
And I suppose my question to you is, since you're already looking at a series of proposed specifications for an area with immunocompromised people, would you not read a lot of these across to this ward?
Not necessarily. I can't remember the order that we designed the hospital in.
All right.
So it could, and I think they were in completely different parts of the building. So it could be that we actually, I don't know if we designed the children's building before the level 4. It could be that they weren't read together. So we have to sort of rely on what's being said in front of us there.
Now, can I just, while we're on that page, because it's about the only technical thing it tells us, we see at the top, entry through a double door barrier system, sometimes called an airlock, but slightly loosely an airlock, allows the entire ward the benefit of low pressure ventilation. Do you know why an airlock wasn't designed when Ward 2A was built?
No, that would have come from the building plans, the actual architectural plans. So we would only probably, we may have, I'm not sure if we knew about that, or well, because obviously we didn't know that was there, or we hadn't picked up on that. But certainly we were expected that to come out of the user group meetings because it's a fundamental part of the building layout. So we would have expected that to come out of the user group meetings, that airlock.
Well, the point of the airlock, as I understand it, and you're the expert, you tell me, is to assist in maintaining a pressure difference between what's inside and the general corridor outside. In this case, with immunocompromised people, a positive pressure difference, so that nothing gets in, it all comes out.
Yes,
in
yes.
layman's terms. Is that
I
correct?
think that's how it actually is managed as well. I suppose, if that is the only entry point into the ward, it's how you manage bed movements, waste, food, people, how does that become a real problem to actually operation of the unit? Because it is a barrier to get into the unit. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that was looked at during the user group meetings and moved away from.
Sorry,
I
can
don't
I
know.
just take you back to the beginning of your answers in response to the being asked about the double door barrier system? I can see that providing 2 doors rather than 1 door is not the ventilation designer's task. But what did you say about the drawing? You began your answer by saying something about where you would have expected the design information indicating a double door to be expressed.
That will be on the architectural plans.
Sorry,
So the architectural plans, so the 1 to 200s, 1 to 50s would have actually shown that, having gone through the user group process and appeared on there.
right. So I take it the architectural plans are the responsibility, in this case, of Nightingale.
Yes, they are. Yes, yes.
So whoever was preparing that drawing would have to have appreciated that this area required to be sealed effectively, or at least the pressure needed to be controlled.
Yes, again, it comes down to, I see the words low positive pressure ventilation. That's not absolutely crystal clear what it means, but I'm going back to what I think I said before, is that you put more air into the space than you take out, and therefore you create an air movement. And I'm not sure how the double door barrier system would assist with that. But clearly it didn't make its way through the user group meetings to the ultimate building plans, and I don't know the reason for that.
Thank you.
But am I not right in understanding that a positive pressure gradient between what was in the ward and what was outside is the kind of protective measure that might be designed in by a ventilation designer to protect those inside from unwanted ingress?
Yes, you would probably put more air into the space than you took out, and that would create an outward airflow of air.
And that would be assisted, if not guaranteed, because you can hold all the doors open, no doubt, assisted by having a double door system rather than a single door system.
That's right, yes. So you would actually at least have, as you say, an airlock, whether people hold the doors open together, or not. I don't know if it would be controlled or not.
You deal with this in your witness statement at paragraph 63 and onwards on page 18. Do I take it from what you say there that you accept that this was another specialist area?
Certainly, it had a number of isolation rooms together, which suggested it was more specialised than standard ward. I think it's the only built part of the hospital that's got that many isolation rooms in one place. So yes, it was a specialist area in that respect.
Yeah, you say in the middle of 63 this was a specialist unique facility. Because I was going to ask you whether you agree, therefore, that it was not one to which the 2.5 derogation should have been applied.
Not necessarily, because again, we would have looked at the non-lobbied bedrooms as being a standard bedroom, not knowing the clinical processes or understand the clinical processes that's gone through in that area. We'd have looked at the drawings, said, oh yes, there's lobbied rooms, they are the specialised rooms, and there's general rooms which would apply to that the standard arrangement.
Now, I can show you the room data sheet if we need it, but the non-isolation rooms in Ward 2A appear to have been provided with 40 litres a second, which is the standard level.
Yeah.
Do you know how that happened? Is that the process you're trying to tell me just a moment ago?
Yes, I think that would have been they would have looked at as a standard bedroom, and that criteria applied.
Notwithstanding the narrative in the clinical output specification and the reference to a requirement for positive pressure.
Yes, and there may be an error there where we put in negative pressure. Again, we would have.
Sorry, you're allowing your voice to drop a little.
Yeah, so we would have looked at the building plans and said, oh, it's a standard bedroom. We will apply that criteria. Now, what we may have missed is actually it was a positive pressure rather than, I think, the standard rooms was a negative pressure. So we'd have had to adjust the air volume accordingly, and that may have been an oversight that we did. But again, we'd have hoped that would have been captured in the review process. Yeah, because there are a lot of rooms in the hospital.
As I understand it, there's about 20 bedrooms in all, of which 8 are isolation rooms, maybe more than 20, in fact. I'm just having difficulty understanding why someone who is applying their mind to it would have thought that the rooms, which are not isolation rooms, but are nevertheless there to accommodate the potentially immunocompromised patients, were just standard bedrooms.
I think probably it's the lack of our knowledge in terms of the actual processes, the clinical processes that go through. We would not have appreciated that. Whilst it said immunocompromised, we would assume that those patients would be dealt with in the isolation rooms, and that the other rooms are like more of a step down type arrangement. But that's probably a lack of our, we don't necessarily understand those processes.
Um,
So we'd have fed that back via the room data sheets.
And as I understand your evidence, other than relying on the checking of your initial work, you made no inquiry to learn what the, to use your expression, processes involving these patients would be.
Yes, that's right. I don't think we did. I'm not sure if we did now. I don't think we did.
Mr. Collins?
I think His Lordship may have asked you that question because in paragraph 63, you say this was a specialist unique facility, but we were not invited to view the existing facilities. Well, let's just pause there. If you needed more information, because you were the people who were charged with the design responsibility, as you tell us, was it not really for you to, in effect, say, we need more information, this is what we need, or can we go and see the Schiehallion in York Hill, or whatever the step you thought was most appropriate?
I think we were relying on the DERs. It was a fast-moving project. I think looking back now, we could have asked that, or we'd have been offered it. Often not. If a user group want to actually show us the facility, they say you must come and see this facility because it's got facilities that are not you would normally come across. With hindsight, yes, we could have gone. It would have been very helpful to go back to the existing facility, but we weren't offered that. And in the fast-moving project.
The reason I ask you the question is quite straightforward. The clinical output specification has very little technical detail in it. It tells you very little. It might give some general description of the kind of people who might or might not have been there, which you might or might not have understood. But the benefit of hindsight is not exactly the kind of situation where you needed more information.
I think we had to rely on what we knew at that time about the general hospital. We applied, we looked at the plans, and we assumed that the standard bedrooms were standard bedrooms. Okay, we may have got the negative pressure. We should put positive pressure, but that would have been corrected relatively simply.
At the foot of that page, you say you can't recall any concerns with the design. To the best of my recollection, the design had followed the brief. Now, with the brief, the clinical output specification we've been looking at?
Yes.
That's what you think you were doing?
I think that's right, yes.
I need to ask you about it because hindsight is no doubt a wonderful thing, but from 2018 onwards, a whole raft of people have looked at this, many of them with varying degrees of expertise in ventilation design, and they've all come back and said, to oversimplify, everything should have had 10 air changes, should have had 10 pascals of positive pressure, there should have been a backup air handling unit or something similar, no chill beams, no thermal wheels. Was that not the kind of conclusion that you could have reached?
Not necessarily, because we were not familiar with the existing facility, and the brief wasn't clear. It turns out, and we also recorded our interpretation on the room data sheets, which were submitted and could have been picked up at that time.
Let me try to ask you about another topic, if I may. Isolation rooms. These have been the subject of much debate and angst by various participants for various reasons. I'm not going to go through all of these with you. First of all, first question, was ZBP responsible for designing the isolation rooms provided in the new hospital?
Yes.
Now, broadly speaking, they were all what are called PPVL rooms. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Let me just ask you about that. Were you not made aware that the clinicians at least were discussing the need to have in various places negative pressure rooms, positive pressure rooms, and other forms of room other than PPVL? Was that not something you were made aware of?
No, we weren't made aware of that. And I think the HBN 0401 suggests that having different types of rooms can be a problem if you use them in the wrong way. So
Well,
the PPVL should overcome the need to have positive or negative type pressure rooms.
Yeah. One of the issues that has arisen is the fact that when the hospital opens, the people who are charged with where to put the next problematic patient who arrives need to know what the rooms are and what their qualities are. So let me just ask you about the HBN, the SHPN, which were both referenced in the material that you had. At the time, and I realise guidance has, as in many cases, moved on. At the time, did that guidance not make it plain that they were not the guidance documents for isolation rooms for those who are immunocompromised?
There is a note in there, yes. I couldn't remember that being the case. But, yes.
And also they're not suitable for an infectious diseases unit.
That's right. I don't think there was an infectious disease unit in the hospital as far as I recall.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask that. In a hospital of this scale, you're the ventilation designer. You know that the guidance doesn't cover an infectious diseases unit. Would you not have been applying your mind as to whether it was likely that people with infectious diseases would be treated at a large hospital of that kind, and therefore getting information to allow you to design accordingly?
I would have expected that one of the wards, if it was treated as an infectious patient ward, would have actually been identified that way. I wouldn't expect infectious patients to be dealt with on the standard ward other than the normal low-grade infections. Certainly another project I was dealing with before my retirement, I'm involved in, they had an infectious diseases ward.
And so far as the suitability of the design for immunocompromised patients, at least so far as the guidance is concerned, did the existence of the note saying this isn't the guidance for immunocompromised patients not require you as the designers to work out what you should provide and then agree that with somebody?
I'm not sure. Again, it says in immunocompromised patients, yes. I think it then goes on to say that additional material will be forwarded at some point. Yeah.
That was the position at that time. I think I'm just trying to understand the way in which a ventilation designer who's told standard design is HBN 04 supplement 1, SPN 04 supplement 1. So you go, fine, I can read that. First, one of the things you see is this is not for immunocompromised patients. There may be another note, which it doesn't exist at the time. Does that not obligate you as the designer to apply your mind as to what should be provided for immunocompromised patients?
Yes, we could have asked the question at that time. What is the alternative to that? I can't remember if we did or not. We put our proposal into the pack and then submitted that for agreement.
Right. So again, on isolation rooms, is your position the same as in relation to answers on other topics, that you would indicate what you were doing and you would expect someone for the board to pick up if that wasn't correct?
Yes, certainly on these specialised boards.
And in that case, that would be somebody who would need to apply their mind to what design of isolation room might be appropriate for somebody who's immunocompromised?
Yes, they would be familiar with their current arrangements or improve their current arrangements depending on their experience.
The other thing that crops up in relation to the isolation rooms is this business of the extract in the main extract being in the bedroom rather than the ensuite. We've had some evidence at this inquiry, so you can tell me whether you're familiar with that when the guidance notes were produced, they were basically tested out on a room layout, which in order to produce the desired airflows had to be pretty much duplicated. Are you aware of that?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
And what you say, and we're on page 20 of your witness statement now, you say you and other colleagues have adopted splitting the extract between the ensuite and bedroom for a reason that you then set out. You say it avoids some issues.
Yeah.
In terms of, well, first of all, in terms of compliance with guidance, that means that they don't comply in their design with the guidance that was to be followed. Is that correct?
Well, looking over, I refresh my memory about this because it's a while since I've looked at it. I think table 1 of the HBN actually does suggest you can actually split the extract between the bedroom and the ensuite.
So, a number of witnesses have told us that designed in that way, they do not comply with the guidance note. Is that incorrect, according to your understanding of it?
Yes, I think that is incorrect. Table 1 says if extract is fitted in the isolation room, this is about the ensuite, reduces 45 litres a second in the ensuite and 113 litres in the isolation room.
Right. You'll need to go a little bit slower and tell us what you're looking at.
Yeah, sorry, table 1 of the HBN.
This is the HBN.
Yes, it's HBN 0401.
Yep. And what part of it are you looking at?
So the table 1, ventilation parameters, and there's a part of that table says the ensuite room, and it gives the size of the room.
Right. Just bear with me a second, and what we'll do is we'll find a document, and we'll put it up, and you can just take us through the relevant part. Yeah. That document is in bundle 16. It's document 4. I'm afraid I don't have the page, but it's document 4 in bundle 16.
Page 314. Yeah. So it's about and it's about 8 pages, and I believe
it's page 8 of the document. So we'll see the page references to the document at the bottom left-hand side for the 8. So that's that page. Yes. Is that the page you're referring to?
Yeah.
And so just help us by what you're saying.
Yeah. So the ensuite there is it's got extract airflow. So it's 158 litres per second is the extract rate. And if extract is fitted in the isolation room, this reduces to 45 litres per second in the ensuite with 113 litres extract in the isolation room. And that overcomes some of the problems of potentially trying to get 158 litres per second extract from a very small room, trying to get in through the door or for a transfer grill.
Entirely my fault. I've got table 1 in front of me. And I think we're interested in the position of the extract. Now, where should I be looking?
So it's in under that last box at the bottom, which is ensuite.
Yes.
You go over to the third box down, extract airflow, and then the next box, nominal design values.
Right.
It's 158
Again,
per second.
Just take me through this slowly. So, are you pointing to the last but one box on the right-hand side?
That's correct.
And an extract airflow is given, and then if the extract is fitted in the isolation room, that's the bedroom.
That's the bedroom, yes.
This reduces to 45 litres per second. So you point to that as accepting the possibility of the extract vent being in the bedroom as opposed to in the ensuite.
Yes, partly in the bedroom and partly in the ensuite, rather than fully from the ensuite.
I perhaps got that wrong. Is the alternative, well, you tell me.
Yes, so you introduce air into the lobby only, and then you allow leakage from the lobby into the corridor, and then you allow air transfer via pressure controller into the bedroom, and that gives you 10 air changes in the bedroom, which is about 158 litres. So what we decided to do is, rather than take it all out of the ensuite, because that's quite a lot of air to come out of the ensuite, it's probably around about 40 plus air changes, which can be quite difficult to get into the ensuite because you've got a door. You often rely on a door gap, but then you have a big transfer grille to get the air through the door, which would be an issue with privacy and potentially noise if you undersize that transfer grille. So we opted to actually split the extract between the room and the ensuite. So we're giving a good ventilation rate to the ensuite, and then we were taking the balance from the bedroom, because extract is relatively localized. It only appears close to the grill. So if you imagine a vacuum cleaner, put your hand over the nozzle, you move it away very slightly, and actually the actual suction effect disappears. So the actual extract is more of a hemisphere around the actual grill. The air movement is driven by
I'm not getting all this detail. What I have got is your solution was to split, as you said. In other words, to have two extract points.
That's right.
One is
in the ensuite.
In the ensuite.
Yes, the ventilation of the ensuite as you would do a normal WC shower.
And the other is in the bedroom.
In the bedroom,
now,
yes.
I think we've heard some evidence about the extract being above the bed. Would that be right?
That can be, yes. It's not quite as
right. Now,
specific.
That is just about all the detail I've got. So what more should I understand from, I mean, you give a fuller answer. So what else were you saying?
So my thoughts are the driving force for air distribution in the room is actually the supply air system, because that's actually pushing the air into the room with some sort of air pattern. The extract is very localized. Once you move away from the grill, it effectively, if you imagine a hemisphere around the grill, the actual velocity and therefore the air entrainment actually falls away very quickly. So the key driver in the isolation room is the differential pressure between the lobby and the bedroom, and the actual supply air distribution, which actually gives you the good air distribution in the bedroom for comfort and scouring the room.
I think it's probably important for us just to make sure we finish this story by looking at the document. Just above the table, there's some narrative parts, and they talk about providing a practical and fail-safe design. And then they say the ventilation system is designed on the basis that all its constituent parts as described in the table below work together to form an integrated system. For example, air to the suite is supplied at high level in the lobby with extract in the ensuite bathroom, and then it goes on to discuss other issues. So at least in narrative terms, the main focus is on that type of design, not your version of it. Now, just so His Lordship has the note, if we look on to the next page of the document, page 9, in paragraph 4.12 in the right-hand column, it says an extract terminal should be fitted at high level in the ensuite room. It says an additional terminal may be fitted at a low level adjacent to the bed head in the bedroom. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Well, we didn't actually provide it at low level in the bedroom. We provided it at high level.
You provided it at high level. So you didn't actually follow what
Not
that
strictly,
required?
no.
Well, not is the answer.
Yeah.
And if we look at the, no doubt, illustrative drawings which accompany, it's a guidance document, but it's one that you said you were following.
Yeah.
If we look at page 13, that's a single room with an ensuite. So sorry, this will be page 13 of the same document. We're currently at same document we were looking at a moment ago. We're at page 8. If we go to page 330, sorry, that's the numbering that I'm using, which is page 13. This is a new build single room with ensuite. We find, to be simple about it, that the extract is in the ensuite, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And if we look at the next example, page 331, key design principles, ensuite facilities and lobby, we find extract in the ensuite and the supply is also indicated.
Yes.
So that at least in terms of the illustrative material, the author seemed to be emphasizing the extract in the ensuite proposition. Is that correct?
That's right.
And is your position, so I'm clear about it, is this another instance where you did what you did, you designed it in the way that you did, high-level extract in the bedroom, and expected the board to agree or disagree with the proposal that you had for isolation rooms?
Yes, we would have expressed why we'd done it, and there would have been discussion. Maybe there would have been a discussion on this point. It would have been rejected, or the discussion would have said, "Yes, I understand where you're coming from about the noise and the size of the transfer grill."
So, again, just so I'm understanding it, somebody who was reviewing your proposed design would need to understand not only why you were doing what you were doing, but also what the impact was, if any, of putting the extract at a high level rather than a low level as the guidance suggested. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Which would perhaps suggest that the person doing that would have to be highly competent in the design of that kind of room.
Well, certainly, so they would have to be understand the ventilation arrangement and understand the reasons why we were proposing that.
I think, my lord, I'm probably at the end of the issues that I wish to cover with this witness for the moment, but perhaps a short pause might be feasible, and then we can return depending on what we're told.
Maybe just a question which may be difficult to answer. The process which you've been through with Mr. Connell depends on the employer's side, GGC in this case, understanding or having the same understanding as you did of the process which of submitting design information to GGC for approval. Now, again, if I've understood your evidence, the mechanism whereby that happened was you submitting design information to the contractor, Multiplex,
Yes.
and understanding that that information would then be passed on to the employer for, using a neutral term, approval. Do you have any knowledge about how it was that it was
I can't
explained to
really recall that. No.
GGC, or confirmed to GGC that their understanding of the process was the same as your understanding of the process?
I can't recall that, but it's fair. It's common on most projects to go through a process of review and comment, rather than approval, review and comment, and raise issues that are unclear or wrong. It's under interpretation, but that's a fairly common process you would expect to go through.
Well, Mr. Connell has to check if there's any further questions in the room. So we'll take a break, maybe for 10 minutes, if I could ask you to return to the witness room. Mr. Connell?
I have three short questions, so with my Lord's permission, I'll ask them now.
All right. I'm told three short questions.
Here's hoping. Right. You told us about the changes you made to the standard design of an isolation room, if I can.
Yes.
I don't mean anything by that other than that's the one you see on the drawings. As you were making the changes, and then you were also changing the positioning of the extract in the bedroom from the low level suggested to a higher level, did you carry out any validation or testing of these proposals?
No, other than the testing would have probably involved a mock-up to determine what the impact was. But we didn't do that, no.
You didn't do it?
No, we didn't do it, no.
Thank you. This is a slightly random question on a different topic. You left at some point in 2014.
That's right.
Do you know when the water system was filled? You've given us some brief answers about water, but
no, we had ZBP at that point, Wallace Whittle, had no significant involvement in the actual construction or commissioning process.
My final point, it simply arises from something that you added in to an answer. In paragraph 42 of your witness statement on page 13, which we might as well just get up so everybody can see what we're looking at. Page 13, please, thank you. You deal in paragraph 42 with the sealing, was the building sealed or unsealed question.
Mm-hmm.
And you say it was driven by noise, and you've also mentioned odour from the sewage plant, and also downdraft from the roof-mounted helipad. But that was a factor in, as far as you were aware, sealing the building.
That was one of the factors, yes, that's right.
Can you help us at all, and if you can't, please just say so, as to whether it's possible for contaminants to be driven by that draft that you're trying to seal against?
From the helipad?
Yes.
I suppose, I don't know about, again, I can only give a view is that there is exhaust from a helicopter, and that presumably that goes down with the airflow from the aircraft. Other than that, I can't think of any other contaminants that would have impacted.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Malone.
And that means we've come to the end of your evidence, Mr. Pardy, and you're free to go. But before you do go, can I thank you for your attendance today, but also the work that will have gone into answering the questionnaire and preparing your witness statement. So thank you for that, and you're now free to go.
Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Connell, I would be inclined to sit again at 2:15 unless you feel that that will impose a time constraint in the afternoon.
I would have hoped not, my lord. The witness, Mr. McKechnie, gives a very short witness statement. So even expanding a little from what's on the text, I would have thought we could deal with that comfortably.
Well, in that case, we will sit again at 2:15.